This morning, we're going to talk about structure. And what I want to present to you is just a broad outline of what we understand with the structure, especially the structure that embodies the values and the teaching of 3-1. Our church implemented this structure since 1998. And so we've been using this structure for the past 23 years. And as a practitioner, as someone that is involved in setting up this structure, implementing this structure, and now going through the various generations, not just at the top, but even in some of the departments and also ministry, I just want to share with you some of my understanding as well as my experiences. This is not a comprehensive teaching on the structure because it will take many hours. And some of the points that are mentioned in the structure in the comprehensive teaching may not be so relevant for you. And so I just want to share with you my journey, my understanding of the structure. And if you are interested to implement this in the church, you will really need to have someone to talk with you, to share with you, and maybe provide you some kind of guidance. Because every church is different. Your church has different kind of people, different qualities, different levels of their life. And so how they bring this into the structure will also affect the structure. And so it is not one size fits all. We need to make certain changes in order to suit different churches. But that is another discussion. So why is structure so important? Recently, I read this verse and it really, really convicted me as to the importance of a good church structure. In Exodus chapter 18, verse 17 to 18 says, Moses' father-in-law replied, "What you are doing is not good. You and these people who come to you will only wear yourselves out. The work is too heavy for you. You cannot handle it alone." Do you remember the context of this story? God has just taken Moses and the Israelites out of Egypt, and now they are in the wilderness. And while they are in the wilderness, there's probably something like 600,000 adults, and probably if you include women and children, they may go up to something like 2 million plus or 3 million people, depending on which way you look at it. And so among the people, where there's people, there's always problems. And where there's a problem, they need a solution. So who do they turn to for the new solution? They turn to their new leader, which is Moses. And so each of them will come to see Moses. Imagine you are just one person and you handle the problem of, say, 2 to 3 million people. And that is why Jethro, the father-in-law, after being so impressed with God, what God has done, looking at how the son-in-law have to face so many people from morning till night, he's telling Moses, Moses, you're going to die. If you continue like this, you will break down. You'll become so exhausted, you will not be able to carry on with this. And so suddenly I realized that, hey, Moses doesn't have a good leadership structure, because what Jethro promises him immediately afterwards, or what the advice that Jethro gave Moses immediately after this, has to do with structure. We're going to learn from it in a short while. And so if Moses did not have a proper and a good structure, what it means is that this 70 or maybe 80 years of preparation from the time the Israelites start crying out to God, and from Moses raising up, and then finally Moses went into the wilderness, and then run away from Egypt, and now he comes out, and all these years of preparation, finally it comes with the deliverance of the Israelites, crossing over of the Red Sea, and they haven't even got to the land of Canaan. This big project of the Exodus may be over as soon as it begins. As soon as it starts, it is finishing, it is ending. And all because Moses did not have a good structure. Now, brothers and sisters, if you're familiar with the Bible, think about this. If you look at the historical books of the Bible, book of Joshua, Judges, and then First Samuel, Second Samuel, First Kings, Second Kings, First Chronicles, Second Chronicles. All this spans the years of history in the Old Testament. Now, when you look at this, you discover that all this book is about structure, all about leadership and how the leadership operates. For example, Judges is about leaders and how they operate. And so it is some kind of a structure, whether obvious or not obvious. And then you have the Kings, which is also a kind of structure, whether and also how it operates. And so when you look at the Old Testament has a major part of the Bible that is about structure, that tells us, that must give us a clue and tell us how important structure is. And when you go to the New Testament, you also see the Jerusalem Council. That is also a structure. And wherever Paul planted churches, when he leaves the church, he will appoint elders in the church. And so wherever he goes, after the church has been established, he will also establish a structure, establish a leadership structure. And so that tells us that the importance of structure is not just in the Old Testament, it is also in the New Testament. And so that is why this leadership structure is so important to each and every one of us who is managing churches or who is leading churches. So let us look at the passage that I was referring to. When I was reading this passage, I realized that there are 6 key things we must have in every good leadership structure. And all this is found in the structure that we are proposing to you, or the structure that we have implemented in our church. We're going to look at this, what Moses said, and then we're going to compare it with the structure we currently now practice in our church. Exodus chapter 18, verse 19 to 23. It says, "Listen now to me, and I'll give you some advice, and may God be with you. You must be the people's representative before God and bring their disputes to him. Teach them the decrees and laws and show them the way to live and the duties they are to perform. But select capable men from all the people who fear God, trustworthy men who hate dishonest gain, and appoint them as officials over thousands, over hundreds, over 50s and tens. Have them serve as judges for the people at all times, but have them bring every difficult case to you. Simple cases they can decide themselves that will make your load lighter because they will share it with you. If you do this, and God so commands, you will be able to stand the strain and all these people will go home satisfied." You see, what Jethro suggested to Moses was actually a leadership structure so that at the end, their problems will all be dealt with, Moses will be at rest, and the people will be happy. And so did the structure work? Of course, to a certain extent, the structure worked. Some people say the structure didn't work because the Israelites did not get into the land of Canaan. And that was more of a people internal problem rather than a structural problem. And so the structural problem actually helped Moses, the structure actually helped Moses a lot. And the problem or the disaster that we were talking about earlier on was averted. Okay, let us look at what is so special about this structure. What is so important about the structure? What are areas we need to consider? Number one, we must consider who is the ultimate leader. In our church structure, Jesus is the ultimate leader, correct? In all church structures, we should have Jesus as the ultimate leader. And so that was the same idea that was proposed in Exodus chapter 18. You see, everything that they do is supposed to keep to God's decrees and laws. That is to say, God has the final say. So the question in every organizational structure is who occupies the topmost box? Who is the true leader? Who has the final say? And so in church, we ask who is the ultimate leader? And the answer is very obvious. It is none other than Jesus. Ephesians chapter 1 verse 22 and 23 says, and God placed all things under his feet and appointed him to be head over everything for the church. So Jesus is the head of the church. Jesus is the ultimate leader. We are also familiar with this verse in Matthew, where Jesus told the disciples, and on this rock I will build my church. If Jesus is the ultimate leader, then who does the church belong to? And according to this verse, who builds the church? Okay, there are basically four interpretations of this verse, or rather, these are the general practices of the people. I will build my church. God will build my church. I will build God's church, and God will build God's church. Which do you think is the most common? Which do you think is the most difficult? And which do you think is the easiest? I will build my church. Who was like that? Nebuchadnezzar was like that. After he saw his kingdom being established, one day he was walking, and then he looked at all his kingdom. He said, this is my kingdom. Who built it? I built it. I put in effort with my wisdom, with my power. I've established my kingdom. And you know what happened to him after that? Because God punished him. The second group of people is God will build my church. You know what kind of people is in this category? Saul. You remember the time when he offered sacrifices? And then Samuel came to him and told him that what you do is wrong. Saul's intention later on was to just get Samuel to acknowledge him in front of the people, to affirm him as a leader. He was actually not bothered about whether he really obeyed or disobeyed God. He was trying to make use of God's servant to give him recognition and position. So he's trying to make use of God to build his position and his nation. So he sees the nation as his own. He saw, in other words, people like that will see the church as their own and make use of God so that God will come and help them. I will build God's church. Now, brothers and sisters, I'm not sure whether you're aware or not. A lot of us are in this category to our own detriment. We suffer because we hold on to this belief, I will build God's church. You know what kind of people think that way? People like Moses. Moses felt that, yes, he belongs to the Jewish nation, and so he was trying to help God, the Egyptians. Did it work out for him? No, it did not work out for him well, and so he had to run away. He had to run away into the desert, and he was in the desert for 40 years. Finally, when God came and called him and said, Moses, I want to send you to Egypt, what was his response? Who am I? It is like God asking him to do something, and he feels that he, with his own natural abilities and resources, have to do it. So he asked the question, who am I? What can I do? You want me to go and fight Pharaoh, which is the most powerful king and nation at that time? It is impossible. Someone like Gideon, also the same. When God said to him, you are a mighty warrior. I'm sending you to fight the Midianites. His response was, how can I do it? My clan is the smallest, and I'm the weakest in the clan. And so again, he looked at his own resources. He's thinking, I have to do it. I have to build it. I have to accomplish the assignment that God has given to me, and I'm too weak to do so. Jeremiah was the same. When God spoke to him, he says, I'm only a child. Elijah was the same. He forgot about God, how God was with him. He feels that he has to be the one who correct the nation and change the nation. And so when he was depressed, he said, I'm the only one left. And so, brothers and sisters, especially leaders and pastors of congregation, if you think that you have what it takes to build God's church, I can assure you, you will end up with tremendous and severe stress. As a result, you will either become a very sad person or become a very angry person. And you will always be looking and seeking for affirmation. Running a church would be actually a very frustrating experience for you. So what is the right way to look at this? The Bible tells us very clearly, I will build my church. So who does the church belong to? It belongs to God. Who will build God's church? God will build God's church. And this is the mentality that we must all have. If God will build God's church, whose responsibility is it to build the church? It is God. Whose resources can we tap on to build the church? It is God's resources. And God's resources has no limits. And so, without limits in God's resources, we can build the powerful church that God wants to build. So we are servants of God. And so there are immediately key changes that are very important. Okay? So what we need to do is that whenever we think about building the church, this is what we must do. We must let Jesus reign because he's the boss. Because he's the ultimate leader. And when we are successful, we need to let Jesus receive all the glory. You see, brothers and sisters, whenever Jesus invites us on a mission, whenever Jesus gives us a task, he's not asking us to do it by ourselves, using our own resources. He's actually inviting us to do what he wants to accomplish. And so it's like when God commanded Joshua to go to conquer the land of Canaan. Joshua was very afraid because he thought that he's got to do it by himself with his own resources. But his understanding was wrong because when he got into the land of Canaan, God was already there waiting for him. He came as the commander of God's armies. God was already there ahead of him. And who is a leader in this situation? It wasn't Joshua. It was God. God was going to lead him. God was going to instruct him. God was going to direct him. God was going to provide all his resources. And we see all this very clearly in the first battle at the city of Jericho. And when Joshua let Jesus reign, when Joshua allowed God to be the leader, when Joshua became the follower and obeyed the instruction of this ultimate leader, he had a victorious battle. And we must be aware, whenever we have a victorious battle, we know that Jesus reigns in our life. It is through our obedience to Jesus' instruction. Not obedience. Murmuring obedience is, I don't like it, but I don't have a choice. I just have to do it. And we grumble and murmur underneath the breath of our mouth. But joyful obedience is saying, yes, what God has commanded me to do, it's best for me. And I will do it, and I will do it happily because it will benefit me and it will benefit everybody else. And after we have achieved some success, or we experience some success, remember to always give the glory to God. If you want to feel the praise of men, if you, after success, want the recognition from the people you are involved with or the people you serve, you are in danger zone. Because that little yearning for recognition, for appreciation, is a poison that will eventually kill you. All the glory must go to God. The second thing that is very important in the vision, in the purpose, in the structure, is vision. The leadership structure must have a vision. It must have a purpose. Without one, the structure has no focus. And without one, the structure becomes meaningless. You see, in Exodus chapter 18, when Jethro spoke to Moses, suggested the framework for Moses to practice, he clearly identified the purpose. He says, whenever they have a dispute, it is brought to me and decide between the parties and inform them of God's decrees and laws. If you do this and God so commands, you'll be able to stand the strain and all these people will go home satisfied. And so what is the reason, what is the purpose for this structure? Is to settle the dispute so that the people can live in peace and Moses can also rest well. That was the basic vision for this structure in the book of Exodus. It is to successfully settle the disputes of the people, and this structure will relieve Moses from the overwhelming load of having to settle all the disputes by themselves. So defining the purpose helps us to keep our structure in check. Is it fulfilling the function it is established for? So how do we get our vision? By two ways. One, have to do both. One, in general, is to study the scriptures. And the more specific is to study the prophecies. What do I mean? When we study the scriptures, from the scriptures, we discover the purpose of the church in general. You see, for example, all the churches are supposed to have elements of prayer. We're supposed to have worship. We must do evangelism. There must be fellowship. There must be teaching. There must be ministry. There must be missions. Every church is the same in these regards. To not do any one of these would mean disaster for the church. To take up any of this component, the church will die. And so we have to do all this. However, for each church, the more specific one, the manifestations of these general purposes may be different because of God's unique direction for that particular church. Maybe because of the needs of the community at that time, or maybe because of the character or the giftings of the leaders that are in the church. We do not know, but for one reason or another, sometimes different churches have different emphasis. Some churches pay more attention to evangelism, while some other churches are more into prayer and worship. Some churches have an international focus, while some churches zero in on some communities. Like there are some churches, they just want to cater, minister to the poor. There are some churches who just want to cater to minister to people with handicap. And also, they could be different emphasis. And so the vision of the church, basically, that is suited for your church, brings together both the general and the specific commission of God for that particular church. And this vision will help and guide the church in all its decision making. So since Jesus is the owner and also the leader of the church, the vision must come from him. Amen? Because it is his church. It is not our church. It is his church. So we need to know what he wants to do for the church. Okay, let me give you an example. This is our church vision: to build a strong people, strong family, strong church, where every member manifests the life of Christ, builds up the body of Christ, extends the kingdom of Christ to fulfill the Great Commission. In order to establish this vision for the church, the key church leaders actually spent a year in 1997 going through what we are discussing with one another. What is God's vision for our church? We met weekly to pray and also to discuss. And during this discussion, we explore and study what the Bible says about the church, what a church should be like. And we also spend that particular year going through all the key prophecies that has been uttered over the church. And so after much prayer and careful deliberation, the church leaders identified the key elements of God's specific commission for the church. And the gist of which, the essence of which is basically, if you look at this, there are two things that are very important. One is to develop people, and the goal of developing people is to build a kingdom church. You see, we want to build the people, And then ultimately, as we build the people, as they manifest their life, as they involve in ministry and builds up the body of Christ, we want to be so strong that we can be an influence, we can be a contributor to the well-being of the Kingdom Church. So ultimately, what we want to be or what we want to do is to be a Kingdom Church. And since the vision was adopted, it has guided all our operations in the church. Annually, we may have different emphases, but those emphases do not deviate, do not go astray from the vision. It helps us to keep on track. For example, if we have to make a decision, because we know that our goal is to build lives, we're not here just to entertain them. We're not here just to have a program to keep people occupied, to make sure people come to church. No, our goal is to build lives. And so whenever we have the activity, we ask ourselves, why do we want to do this activity? Does it help us to fulfill our church vision? Is it here to build lives? Does it contribute towards building people? Or is it just for entertainment? So if it is just for entertainment, then we don't want to do. But if it has an element of entertainment, but ultimately it helps in building the lives of the people, then we are okay to do it. Just the other day, we had a discussion. We have one of our pastors in the church who is now quite elderly, close to maybe something like 60 years old. And he submitted an application and he wants to go and study part-time study to get his master's degree. Now, he is leading the Bahasa service. And so, in Malaysia, people who are leading the Bahasa service actually is not many. And in the Bible school, there are also not many Bible school teachers. And so when his request was brought up, there were several considerations. Because he's about 60 years old, he will retire soon. Although our church, you can continue to serve after you retire, but you can also choose not to serve after you retire. Basically, the retirement means you no longer have a salary, but you can continue to serve actively in the church. And so there was some concern that was raised up. What if we sponsor his study, and then upon his graduation, which is also near to his retirement age, and then he quit and no longer involved in our church? Of course, that is an important consideration. But what we see from another perspective was that over the past few years, he has contributed towards the church. But the deciding factor is this. What kind of church are we building? Are we building just a church in the locality? Or are we building a kingdom church? Do we just care for ourselves, or do we also care for others? And so someone in the meeting brought up and said that, hey, we are a kingdom church. He may not be serving with us, but the investment that we put in him, the training that we provide for him, will make him a better person, so that even if he doesn't serve with our church, he can serve the kingdom of God and become a blessing to the kingdom of God. You see, that's how we make decisions. Because a decision then comes back, not just a submission to a certain leader, but it ultimately comes back to what we understand, or how we understand God's intention and purpose for the church. And so when we bring up the fact that we are a kingdom church, we don't mind investing in him, so that even if he doesn't serve with us, he's able to serve other churches, serve other people, or serve in the Bible school and train more leaders for the Bahasa community. Then immediately the decision was made and the sponsorship was approved. That is how important a church vision is. It will guide us in every decision or every project in the church. The next thing that is very important is the values. Exodus chapter 18, verse 21, it said, but select capable men from the people, men who fear God, trustworthy men who hate dishonest gain. Every decision we make and everything we do is guided by our common adopted values. Values are principles or beliefs or ideals that are important to church. How does the value, why is the values so important? What part does it play? When we are talking about values, we're not talking about certain action. We are talking basically about our attitudes or the principles we hold to. For example, let's say we have a goal, we have a vision, and the vision or the project, the goal is to be a blessing to a poor community. Like, at this present moment, because of the COVID situation, the church has embarked on a lot on all these kind of projects to the poor. Okay, so if you want to be a blessing to the poor community, then the action is very simple. You have to give something to them. And let's say you want to give grocery boxes. And so to be a blessing to the community, that is our vision, that is the goal. How can we go about doing it? Is what kind of action, what kind of method do we use? By giving them grocery boxes, maybe each box worth about 100 ringgit. But the other thing that is very important is with regards to our attitude. How are we going to present these boxes to them? Are we going to do it just to do it as quickly as possible so that we can finish this project? Or do we want to do it in love? That as we give to them, we want to touch their lives with our love. You see, the two approach will be very different. Both have the same end, both achieve the idea of being a blessing to the community, both gets the grocery boxes to them, but one, you may be in a rush. You may be rude. You may be angry. You might just want to get people stand up in a straight line. And if they don't stand in a straight line, you might shout at them and then just quickly deliver the boxes so that you can clear it and go away. But if you think, I want to do this small thing with great love, then it will take time. Even when you deliver, you smile at them. You will be courteous to them. You will help them. If there are older people, you might provide a chair for them to sit. When you talk to them, there will be a smile. You interact with them. You want to find out about their lives. And so you can see how values are so important, because the focus is not on what we do. The focus is on how we do what we do. And so when you look at these qualities that Moses highlighted, or rather Jethro highlighted, he said, okay, these people that we use, they must have these qualities. They must have these values in their life. They must honor God. Everything they do, they must put God first. And they cannot be swayed by money. That is to say, they cannot be bribed. People are more important than wealth. So what are values? Let me quickly give you a definition. It is a principle, whether it is implicit or explicit. Implicit means it is something that is natural, something that is hidden, but explicit, something that is already verbalized and written up, that a leader, or in this case, the church, uses as a guideline for decision-making, for exercising influence, or for evaluation. You see, when you have certain values and you have the correct values, that will, every time you make a decision, it will actually help us to make it faster. And if we all hold on to this same value, when we talk, when we do things, it will become part of our lives and we become the example for others. And we can also use this as a form of evaluation to see whether this is something we want to do or this is something that we don't want to do. And so when we have common values, it will bring about greater understanding and unity. And brothers and sisters will also be able to understand the church better. And they will also understand the rationale, the principles we hold to behind every decision. So when leaders operate unanimously on an agreed set of values, working with one another will become such a blessing. Let me give you an example to help you understand this. I think one of the things that you always hear in 3-2-1 is 人比事重要. People are more important than tasks, or people are more important than things. One time we have a church brother new to the church. He was very on fire. And so what he did was that he helped the church to ferry brothers and sisters from their home to the church, and after the church service to send them home. So on this one evening, all of us were gathered near the church. He was in the church van, and he was joyfully talking, very happily serving, and then people was going into the van, and after that, he started to reverse. But because he was so happy and so excited, he forgot to look behind. And so when he reversed, he knocked into another car. So whose fault? His fault. Who pays for the repair? And so there was a discussion among the leaders. Who pays for the repair? So some say that, well, he made the mistake. He should pay for the repair. Do you think this is right? And someone said that, if he make the mistake, he doesn't have to pay for the repair. Then in future, brothers and sisters can also abuse the things that is in the church. We may be sending a wrong message that the things in the church can be taken for granted. And then we have to spend so much money just to refurbish or replace these items. But there were some others who said this. They said that, this brother is a young church member, and it is a mistake. It is an accident. He did not do it on purpose. He reversed. Yes, he made a mistake. He reversed. And so he said that, well, the most important thing about church is people. 人比事重要. And so what we need to do is to tell him that, okay, in this case, the church will pay for the damage. The church will pay for the repair. But in future, please be very careful. We really appreciate you for the ministry, but the ministry has to be exercised with caution. And so we're very thankful that the leaders all agreed on this, and then that was the decision that was made. You see, the decision becomes easy because we have a preset value system. And so when we bring up the value system and say that people are more important than things, immediately it causes everybody to see and look from the same perspective. And that became the guideline for our decision. And the decision was made very quickly, faster. And then as a result, when we tell the people, it also influenced their life. Until today, this brother is still, I think this happened maybe about 30 years ago. Until today, this brother is still with us, serving actively in the church. It is such a blessing. The moment you start to apply these values in the church, these will become the characteristics of your church. Because people are more important than things. The way we spend time to connect with people in the church is also different. Everyone becomes important. We have pastors from Indonesia. We have pastors from the Filipino church. They come and visit our church. And then they realize that we have something that they don't have. And because it's so much a part of us, we don't realize that we have something they don't have. And for us, it is just normal because it is part of our life. But for them, it is so abnormal because they've never seen it before. And the contrast is so great that these pastors, one from Philippines and one from Indonesia, actually went back to their own country and then make an appointment with us. He said, I want to bring my team of leaders to come and visit your church. We want to come and learn from your church. And then we have to ask them, what do you want to learn about our church? And so one of these pastors said, your church is so friendly. And he counted how many times people shook his hand. Of course, now cannot shake hands. How many times people shook his hands and tell him welcome before he even gets into the church. He said, this does not happen where he came from. The pastor from Indonesia came and said that your church members are so friendly to one another and also to the pastors and leaders. He said, in our church, he's one of the biggest church in the island he come from. He said, in our church, when I walk in one direction, one side of the road, my members walk on the other side of the road. He said, in the church, there's no fellowship. People come for service, and immediately when the service ends, everybody disappears. He said, our church is like putting on a show. When the show finished, we collect money, and after we collect money, everybody go home. Wait to come next week for the show. He said, this is not what the church is supposed to be, but we do not know how. And the reason why we are different It's not because we are better. We are different because we have certain values that guide us. Because we say that the church is a family. Because we say that the church, people are more important than works, more important than tasks. So we want to pay attention to the people. If we have not done enough, we need to do more. So where can you get your church values? All of you who are attending this class, I'm sure you're familiar with 3-1. The Bible is my base. Jesus is my model. The Holy Spirit is my guide. And so you need to study what is taught in 3-1 and then see what the key things that are really important and valuable for you. I mean, all are important, all are valuable to everyone, but it's specific that you need to emphasize and practice in your church. Those can be taken and listed down as a value in the church that you constantly repeat in your speaking, in your teaching, in your conversation with the people, and in making decisions, so that everybody is brought onto the same page and look at the situation from the same perspective. And because of that, your values will pass on to one another. In 1994, 93 or 94, I was asked to lead an English congregation. The reason why I was appointed to lead the English congregation was not because I know how to do it. The only reason that I was asked to lead the English-speaking congregation was because I was the only English-speaking pastoral staff at that time. And so I did it. Wow, it was really not easy. I didn't know how to move forward. And so I prayed to God because when it started, the English congregation had something like 80 people. But over time, because of neglect, nobody was really in charge. Nobody really knew what to do. The congregation reduced down to something like 20 plus 30 people. And so we had to respond to their complaint. And as a result, the church leaders sent me to go in to settle this. So I look at the situation, I really don't know what to do. But the Holy Spirit is our guide. So I prayed. I said, God, what should I do? And God said, start a committee. I said, oh, who should I put in a committee? And he says, everyone that speaks the loudest, take him and put him inside the committee. Now, it works for me, okay? It doesn't mean that it worked for you. You seek God for your own answers. It was specific to me. So I got the people who spoke the loudest. And I asked God, why? He says, because the people who speak the loudest, in their speech, they will give the direction. So you have 5 people speaking the loudest, they have 5 different directions, and there will not be any unity in the church. There will be confusion. Take them all in, put them in a committee, and discuss inside. And so for the first 2 years, we met once a month. And in most of our meetings, we actually don't make any decision because we cannot make decisions. The 5 of us come from 5 different church backgrounds. And so we have different values. But the 2 years of discussion caused us to be able to see one eye to eye with one another, caused us to be able to agree in what our priorities, what is our vision, what are our values. And so that helps us to make decisions for the future. And we also begin to understand one another, what is important to each other. And so at this moment, there are several key value systems that are very critical, very important to our church that we emphasize all the time. Number 1 is humility. Number 2, we must love God. And by love, we mean that it is a love that is committed to God, and it is also intimate. Not just intimate, have the feeling part, not just committed, have the dedication part. We want to have both the commitment and also the intimacy, so that we enjoy loving and serving God. We must love people. People are more important than tasks. We are a family. We must treat them with grace. And towards the outside church, our goal is to be a kingdom church, so that we become a blessing to them rather than a threat to them. Now, one of this was a very important decision we had to make. Several years ago, maybe about 20 years ago, if I remember correctly, we had a group of Indian brothers and sisters that was in our church that was attending the English service. And after some time, they feel that, their gifting, their passion is really towards the Indian speaking community. And so they wanted to start a church. And we talked to them and we said, yes, it is a good thing. But we didn't want them to start a church within our church compound, because we understand that if we were to do that, then it will attract a lot of people from our surrounding churches. And most of the Indian churches are small in Malaysia, less than maybe 50 people. And so we start to attract some of these people from the surrounding churches. While we are able to build our church very quickly, most of these smaller churches would die. And so because we are a kingdom church, this vision and also these values affected or guided our decision making. And so we say, it's very good, you can start a church, but don't start it in the church compound. And we explain to them and they understand. And so what we did was that we helped them to rent a place that they like, help to renovate the place, and then provided them a monthly support so that the Indian church can be established. And the reason why we do that is very simple, and everybody can agree to this very quickly. It's because we have this vision, we are a kingdom church, and this kingdom church idea also becomes a guiding value for the church, which is to care for other churches. Okay. The third aspect, we have looked at ultimate leader, we have looked at vision, we have looked at values. Now we want to look at the operation of the structure itself, hierarchy. There is always a hierarchy in organizational structure. And hierarchy has to do with the nature and the flow of authority. For example, in Exodus 18 verse 21 says that, select capable men from all the people, men who fear God, trustworthy men who hate dishonest gains, and appoint them as officials over thousands, over hundreds, over fifties, over tens. So you can see that there's a hierarchy. There's a flow of authority. Now, brothers and sisters, we need to understand something very important about authority. Because all the authority we have is not self-generated. All the authorities we have is because God gave us those authority. The authority we have is delegated authority. And the purpose of authority, we must be very clear, is not for self-glorification or self-exaltation. The purpose of authority is to serve the people so that the people may be built up. And how we exercise this authority is through serving, through building relationship, and through building influence. You remember the time when Jesus spoke to the disciples and how the disciples, they want to sit at the right hand and the left hand. And Jesus got them together and spoke to them. He says, Jesus called them together and said, you know that the rulers of the Gentiles lord it over them, and their high officials exercise authority over them. And of course, after that, he told the disciples what his style of leadership, how his style of operating authority must be. So you look at this. They have the position, and once they have the position, of course, they have the authority. And they feel that since I have authority, he lorded it over there. It means that he has the right to be served. I am the Lord. I am the master. I am the leader. You are all under me. You are my followers. Therefore, you are my servant. Because I am your leader, you are supposed to serve me. You are supposed to serve me. You are supposed to come under me. And to serve me means my needs are your needs. My problems are your problems. And so your whole goal and purpose in life is just to help me solve my problem. And if you don't, I will insist, I will demand, I will command you. Now that's the general idea of leadership in the world. But Jesus said, for you, it must not be like that. Is it not so with you? Cannot be the same. Must be different. How different? Instead, whoever wants to become great among you must be your servant, and whoever wants to be first must be your slave. And so what is the difference? Well, when you're a leader, you have a position, you have an authority, but what is the authority for? The authority is to give you the right to serve. Now you are officially, as a leader, now you can officially say, I am here to serve you. To serve means your problem is my problem. I'm here to help you solve your problem. And how do you do it? Not by insistence, not by demanding, not by commanding, but by influence through relationship. Yeah, because we are their servant. Okay. So there is this aspect of hierarchy. Now, another thing that is very important in this leadership structure is the aspect of well-defined roles. What do I mean? Yes, there's hierarchy, but what are each of these person in those positions who occupy those boxes supposed to do? Okay, in Exodus chapter 18, verse 18 to 21, again, they have this authority, but I think I did not give you the right verse. What they are supposed to do is that they have a very specific task. Just ignore the Bible verse. They have a very specific task. Their task was this. They are supposed to judge the simple disputes. You see, very well defined. What are they supposed to judge? Simple disputes. And when they cannot handle, what are they supposed to pass upwards? And eventually, I believe that if it is a 10, then pass to the 50, then pass to the one that is in charge of the 100, then pass to the one that is in charge of the 1,000. And if cannot, then pass to Moses. And if Moses cannot, then he passed to God. And so there is this well-defined role. Okay. Now, so if you put this together in a structure, you have Jesus, you have vision and values, and then you have the one team and the one man. We're going to talk about that in a short while. But this is structure we have. Then you have the one man, one team, one group. Now, there is a hierarchy from top to bottom, and each of these have well-defined roles so that they know what they're supposed to do, how they're supposed to operate their authority. And their roles, their well-defined roles, is of course dependent on the gifts or the ministry that God has given them. The people who are in higher positions of authority are people who demonstrate a greater proficiency in the execution of their ministry or demonstrate greater character. Okay, now just hang on this for a while, and later on I'm going to talk to you how this structure operates. But just hang on to this for a while. But then I'm going to expose you or talk about some of the other structures that is common among us. Well, in the old structure, what we have is singular leadership. There's Jesus. Everybody say Jesus is the Lord, is the key leader. But whether they really do it or not is another matter. And then you have the one man. And underneath the one man, you have a team, a committee, and then, of course, they govern the whole church. What is the advantage of this singular leadership? I'm just going to go through this very quickly. Can make very quick decision because the one man. Less power struggle because there's no one to struggle with. He's the one man. And if he is very good, very strong, very powerful, very wise, very gifted, then you can experience fast growth. A minimum meetings, no need meetings because he himself make the decision. Now, what is the problem? What is the disadvantage of singular leadership? Very lonely. You know, there's one very senior, very key pastor in America that actually said this. He later on fell into some kind of a moral sin and was removed from his pastorship. It was very sad. But when he was interviewed, he said this, because I was very lonely. I don't know who to turn to. I don't know who I can share my problems with. And that was his reply, the reason for him making that mistake. When you are a singular leadership, you are at the top, there's no covering. You are your own boss. Easy to become famous. If you do well, then everybody see, oh, that church. Whose church? Easy to become proud. Of course, serious impact if he sins because he's the leader. When he failed, then there's no more leaders in the church. It promotes dictatorship. One man makes all the decisions. Everyone must submit to me. And usually in such a structure, it's very hard to find successes. Okay. And if he dies, again, the leadership there'll be a vacuum in the leadership and it will bring chaos. What about the next one? Plural leadership. This is also very common where the one team come together. And one of the characteristics usually of this plural leadership is that everybody must agree before making a decision. What are the disadvantages? What is the advantage? The advantage is that you have mutual protection. You can protect one another. It's easy to be hidden. And because there's so many people in the committee or in the leadership team, it is easy to delegate to one another. What about the disadvantage? Everyone must see eye to eye, agree with one another before something can be done. And so the process of decision making becomes very tedious and very long. And sometimes it's not possible to get two persons to agree on the same thing. You remember the story of how the blind man was touching the elephant? Every one of them feel that they are right. One says that the elephant is like a pillar. Another one says the elephant is like a fan. Another one says the elephant is like a rope. They're all right. But they are not looking at things comprehensively. And they are not able to see what the other person sees. And that happens to many of us in normal life. And so sometimes it is impossible to get everybody to agree. And because nobody agrees or not everyone agrees, the decision cannot be made. And that aspect of the church, that aspect of the ministry cannot move forward. What other problems do they have? Well, wasting time, having meetings, slow progress. No clear delegation of authority brings about power struggle. Not easy for ministry to be affirmed because everybody is doing the same thing. Yeah? Uncertain of who the leader is. No one bears responsibility when something happens. Okay. Now, what's the difference in the new structure that we were talking about? The new structure that we were talking about and the one that the church implemented since 1998 is a combination of the strength of both singular and plural ministry. So we have Jesus as our ultimate leader. We are guided by our vision and values in everything we do, or that's what we aim to do. Then what we have is the one team. This is where it is similar to the plural leadership structure. But we have a very simple, but very powerful, very effective tweak to the system, which is the one man. It's called the one team, one man. It's not just one team. It is not just one man. It is one team, one man. And this is where it is really special. I will go into it in a short while to talk about this aspect of the church structure. And then out of the one team, the people that are in the one team, they also lead others. So out of the one team will come the one man. And the main purpose is to raise up future leaders or to guide certain ministries. So under the one man, there's the one team, and there's also the one group, which is basically the congregation. Now, what is happening in our church at this present moment is that in this bottom one man, okay, in this bottom one man, in some of our ministry, this is already changing to one team. They're operating as a team in order to lead a bigger team so that they can lead the entire congregation. And this is already happening because we can also apply this in the lower one team, but never mind. If you understand, you understand. If you don't understand, just ignore. It's okay. So what is so special about this one team, one man? Now, if you look at the Bible in Ephesians chapter 4, verse 11 and 12, it says this: it was he who gave some to be apostles, some to be prophets, some to be evangelists, some to be pastors and teachers, to prepare God's people for works of service so that the body of Christ may be built up. Now, if you look at it, in order for there is proper works of service in the church and for the church to be built up, what do you need? You need all these 5 ministries: apostles, prophets, evangelists, pastors, and teachers. Now, if you look at this 5-fold ministry, you can also see that this is actually connected with 5 major functions of the church. Let me give you an example. Evangelism. As a church, we need to evangelize, correct? prophet has to do with connecting with God, to worship God, and let God speak to us. And so a lot of times our prayer meetings, our worship, that's where the prophet is most active. Then we need pastors, our fellowship, our cell group, our pastoral camp. All this comes under pastors. And then, of course, we need to have teachers rightly dividing the truth of God to teach people. And then, finally, of course, we have the apostles who provide leadership for the church, or lay foundation for the church, or plant new churches, do mission work. So all this. So if you look at all these five, they cover all the 5 or the 7 or the 8, depending on how you look at it. They cover all the major general functions of the church. And so if you want to build a church, you need to have this fivefold to be able to see more completely, decide more constructively, and to minister more effectively. And so the best model, of course, is to have these 5 working together. If you just have one and that person makes all the decision, then as an apostle, all his decision will have an apostolic bias. If you get a prophet as a senior pastor, the key leader of the church, and he makes all the decision, then you realize that the church will have a prophetic bias. Or if you get a teacher making all the key decisions in the church, then the church will have a teaching bias. But if you put the 5 together and all of them cooperate with one another and make decisions together, then you have a more comprehensive church. Okay, let us look at how this thing operates. How does the one team operate, and where does the one man comes in? Okay. The background for this is Acts chapter 15 at the Jerusalem Council. Of course, they have an issue about the Gentiles getting saved. And the church at that time was considering whether they want to make the Gentiles go through the same ceremonial laws that the Jews were going through at that time, and whether they should be recognized as genuine believers, because prior to that, only Jewish people became Christians. So whether this privilege or this benefit should be expanded to the Gentiles. Okay, notice in verse 7, after much discussion, which means everybody can speak, right? Discussion. Yeah. Peter got up and addressed, brothers, so on and so forth. So Peter spoke. And then the whole assembly became silent as they listened to Barnabas and Paul. So Peter spoke, Barnabas spoke, Paul spoke. After everyone has listened to what everybody has said, then finally, verse 13, he says, when they finished, James spoke up, brothers, listen to me. So James made a final decision, everybody else agreed. But you find that in Acts chapter 2, it was Peter who made the decision. Acts chapter 15, verse 13, it was James who made the decision. And so what it means is this. Now, this is where it is different, this is where it is special, and this is where you need to pay attention. Can you see this arrow here? This arrow is bi-directional. So what it means is that it can enter, you can exit. So the people from the one team can enter into the one-man position, just like, in the one team, that's where the discussion can take place. Everyone can speak. And of course, when other people speak, we must also learn to listen. So you can speak, you can listen. But then you can also, at a certain point, after all the discussion has been said and done, then a decision must be made so that we can move on. That is where, out of the one team, one of them will step into the one-man position, and then everyone in the one team gives the one man the authority to make a decision over this matter. So can you see? There's the balance between the plural ministry and also the singular leadership. In this, we can also make decisions very quickly. We can also find protection. We can also find covering from one another. Okay, the benefits we'll talk about later on. Okay. So in discussion, everyone can speak, everyone can listen. Then we make the decision. Now, who makes the decision? Who becomes the one man? It depends on the task that is discussed at hand. The authority to make the final decision in a particular matter is to be given to the one with proven ministry in that particular field. Okay, so if the situation or the issue that is being discussed is an evangelistic issue, then the person who is the evangelist can have the final say. If it's a prophetic issue, then the person who is the prophet can have a final say. If it's a teaching issue, then the person who is a teacher has a final say. Right? So after he has made that decision, what happens to the one man? He doesn't sit in a position and make decision for all the other issues. What he needs to do is to return. So if the first issue is an evangelistic issue, the evangelist steps into the one-man position and then have the final say. And if it's later on, he goes back into the one team. The next issue is a teaching issue. Then the person who steps up into the one-man position to have the final say is the teacher. And then he will have the final say and then goes back to the one team. So it depends on what is the issue at hand. So there's first the discussion, and then there's a decision where the person with the proven ministry will have the final say. And then the third part is, what about responsibility? After we make a decision, it is the corporate responsibility. Everyone then is responsible for that decision. So if there's any question, we stand together as one team, we stand together as one group of people with equal commitment to the decision that has been made, even if we don't fully agree. And so that's how we operate. And thank God we've been operating like this since 1998. And the amazing thing is we have not come to a point where someone insists on using their final say. We have not once. Even though this is provided for in the structure, we have not gotten anyone who says that this is my ministry, I have the final say, let me just make the decision. So what we have done over this past 20-something years is always to discuss. Why is discussion so important? And of course, skillful discussion is more important. When we have discussion, we can bring everyone to see, to help one another to see the same thing in the same way. Why is this important? Because when we are able to see the same thing in the same way, when we have agreement, then naturally we have unity in our belief system. We have unity in our values. We have unity in our approach. And there are times when we don't agree with one another, but we take the humble route and says that it's okay. I do not see fully because I don't think I can ever see fully because you're discussing an apostolic issue. My role is that of a teacher. I cannot see fully, but you go ahead. You make the decision. I support you. And so at this present moment, we have what we normally practice in our church is that church leadership is that the discussion. And then after there's this discussion in our disagreement, when we don't agree with one another, very often what we will do is that we'll recognize the other person's ministry and we will tell him, you make the decision. We will follow and we will support you. And so it is such a joy and pleasure being able to serve in this body of leaders because we feel protected, we feel supported, we feel encouraged by their presence, especially when we have some of the older leaders in the group and from their experience, they are able to offer a lot of wisdom. So we are very thankful for the leadership in our church. Okay. Now the last aspect, which is very important, number 6, is this aspect of quality people. You don't just put anyone in the team. You see, when Jethro was telling Moses, he told them, he said, you must select men who fear God, trustworthy men who hate dishonest gain. That is to say, they already have this quality in them. When you put people to leadership, they must be qualified. Don't just choose any person and hope that they will make it. It is likely that they won't, because quality needs time to develop. And so there are those that you can prepare a place for them to develop, but when it comes to key leadership position, you must choose the right people. And by choosing them, the right people, is not because of their wealth, not because of their reputation. It must be proven, okay? They must earn it. So in the previous segment, when we talk about uh, well-defined roles, we are actually talking more about their giftings. But in quality people, we are talking more about their character. Okay. So what are the things that we look for? How can we look at whether they have good relationship with one another? Because the church is a family, it's all about relationship. So does these people enjoy or know how to build relationship with people? This is very important because the whole structure operates by influence, not by instruction, not by commandment, not by insistence. And so only when you have good relationship, you're able to exercise or you're able to get work done through influence. Another thing that is very important, of course, is mature character and proven ministry, especially the people that is part of the one team. If they don't have proven ministry, then they're unfamiliar with the aspect of ministry. How can they make decisions? They need more time to practice. They need more time to work things out before they can be raised to that position of decision making. And then, of course, they must be responsible, because if they're not responsible, they just hit and run. The moment they have problem, they run away. In this kind of, the English have the saying, rolling stone gathers no moss. And so because of that, they will not be able, if they don't stay, if they don't dig their foot in, they don't hang on to go through whatever situation or frustration they have in the ministry or the project that they're handling, they will not fully appreciate the lesson they need to learn. Okay. So let me give you one group that's very important. The people in the one group at the bottom is what I see as people who are trying to learn their Christian responsibilities. Another aspect, the people in the one team are people who is practicing their Christian gifts. And then finally, the people who are in the one man, who is also part of the one team, who is also part of the one team on top, are people who are already familiar with their offices. When I talk about offices, I talk about that 职分. 职分 means they already know their apostle, pastor, prophet, evangelist, teacher. They're already familiar with that aspect of ministry. Okay, now, in Christianity, we have such thing as Christian responsibilities. And we also have such thing as Christian gifts. And we also have such thing as Christian officers. Let me just give you one example. For example, prophecy. In Acts chapter 2, verse 17, it says that your sons and daughters will prophesy. So it's like everybody also can prophesy. This is part of Christian responsibility. We need to learn. All of us also need to teach, because the Great Commission tells us, go and make disciples of all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit, teaching them to obey. And so the Great Commission goes to everyone. So all of us need to know how to teach. So we also have a responsibility in teaching. We also have a responsibility in evangelism. Preach the gospel to all creatures, correct? It goes out to everyone. So if you look at we also have a responsibility to worship. We also have a responsibility to fellowship, to take care of people, take care of one another, love one another. So these are all Christian responsibilities. But out of this group where we have to practice in general our Christian responsibility, we are stronger in some of them because God has given us such gifts. For example, in 1 Corinthians chapter 12, verse 10 tells us that to another prophecy. This is talking about spiritual gifts. Yes, all of us can prophesy, but some of us can prophesy better because it is part of our gifts. All of us are supposed to teach, but some of us can teach better because it's part of our gift, as mentioned in Romans chapter 12. Right? All of us need to manage. We need to be able to administrate to a certain extent, but some of us are better at administrating, which is a gift mentioned in Romans chapter 12. So there is a difference between responsibilities. Responsibility is something that everyone can do, should do, must do. Gifts, each person have different gifts. We have gifts in certain areas, we may not have gifts in other areas. In the areas that we have gifts, we generally tend to perform better in those areas compared with others. And so usually the people with the gifts are the people that we can then train and help them to develop even more. And some of them may end up having certain office. They become the minister, the person that God has gifted to the church, to lead the church by, for example, they can become a teacher, they become a prophet, they become an apostle, they become a pastor, they become an evangelist. And so this is how I see offices. Offices, people who are in the offices, people who have the fivefold ministry, people who have the 职分, are not just people who can operate in those areas of giftings, but they must also have the ability to teach and to train. Because the Bible tells us that they are supposed to prepare God's people for works of service. And we already identify that each of these fivefold ministry is connected to a major aspect of church service. And so the people who have the officers, their job, their role is to be able to prepare God's people, to be able to train them so that they become proficient in their service. That's why this one man here is the one who holds the office, 有职分. And then what he tries to do is try to guide, to help, to develop, to train the people who have the 恩赐, who have the spiritual gifts. And the spiritual gifts people can influence through their example, through their lifestyle, through their teaching, through their exercise of their gifts, and to encourage the people in the group, in the church, to walk in the same way or to exercise those responsibilities. And so where do we get the people in the top team? By this one man, what he does is that he trained the one team train the one group, and then slowly from the one group, they rise up to the one team, and the one team become the one man. And so then when they come up to having those officers, they can be brought into the deciding team. Okay, later I'm going to explain to you more. Okay. Now, what is very important also is at this point, the one group and the one team, because they are moving between responsibility and one team, between responsibilities and gifting. They may do their responsibilities well. And so we may say, oh, maybe he has a gift. And so we raise them up to this one team. But after doing for some time, maybe, they can go up. Maybe after doing for some time, they're not suitable. Maybe they're not really in this aspect of gifting. Maybe they have some other areas of gifting. So we shift them to another area. Like some people that we have in the church, they think their gift is in teaching. After teaching for a while, they realize that they cannot make it. And then they discover something else. Maybe they have a greater burden in evangelizing. And so we shift them over to evangelism phase. And sometimes, it's not their time yet. They haven't learned enough. They still need a lot of practice in the area of Christian responsibilities. So instead of being in this one team, they go down. You see, sometimes in the one team, we may have multiple spiritual gifts, but which of the gifts really help us to have multiple gifts? Like for some people, they may have pastoral gift, they may have a teaching gift, they may have an evangelistic gift. All these can be found in one person. But which one is the most prominent? Which one is the one that they can really rise up into that one man? And so that need to be discovered and exercised so that eventually you discover where he's supposed to be. Now, in the church, this part is just an example, because out of the one team, you may have another one man and another one man and another one man that comes down, and they're one team and one group. Okay, so let me quickly just summarize this for you. There is a difference between the top one group, the top part of the structure and the bottom part of the structure. What's the difference? This is where all the decisions are made. The strategies are set. Because These are the people who are experienced in ministry, have proven ministry, have mature character, they are responsible, and they have good relationship. So they are the ones who make the ultimate decisions for the church in submission to Jesus, in submission to the vision and the values of the church. Okay, so these are the decision makers. And this bottom part, who are they? They are the executors, because these are the people who are trained to practice their gifts and are trained to practice their Christian responsibilities. This is where the action happens. And so in this structure, the top part is important because this is where decisions are made. The bottom part is also important because this is where the action happens. What is special about this one team, one man? Because they can enter and exit, they can listen and also speak. We can have discussion, then we can come together and make decision. And if we cannot make decision by coming together, then we give the authority to the person with the proven ministry to have the final say. Then we can move forward. You know, most of the situation we currently have in the church, we can make decision in a single meeting. But there are times when the decision may affect too many people and our perspective may be very diverse. Then we will say, okay, let's not make the decision at this meeting. There's still a lot of discussion. We haven't heard everyone's views. Then we can say, okay, let's think about this, postpone to the next week, and then we come together and discuss again, then only make a decision. And usually in 2 meetings, all the decisions can be made and the church can move forward. So we are very thankful for that, especially for the humility of the current crop of leaders that we have. Okay, so where do we get people for the one team? It's from the bottom one team after they have been trained in their giftings and they have arrived at the standard of officers, of ministers. Of course, they must have this. That's what we call proven ministry. But at the same time, they must also demonstrate good relationship, mature character, and they must be responsible. Then only they'll be raised up. Otherwise, if you're based on ministry, proven ministry alone, if they have bad relationship, then they cannot work as part of the team. If they have mature character, they also cannot work as part of the team. If they're not responsible, they may be very gifted, but if they're not responsible, then whatever that's tasked to them will not finish. Okay. So this is generally what the structure is all about. So they have, the bottom one have responsibilities, then the one team have gifts, they can move up and down, they can also be shifted. And finally, we hope that everybody, for those who are called, if you're not called to officers, it is okay, because not everybody has the fivefold. Okay? But if you have, then you should develop that way, because God gives some 1,000, some 1 talent, some 2 talents, some 5 talents. Not everybody is the same. Wherever God has called us, be contented and serve God happily in that position. Okay. I'm going to share this. Then when I finish, I'm going to take a break and then we're going to come back for the next session. Okay. So in the leadership structure within the one team and one man, what are the things that we need to take note of and how does it benefit us? There's an interrelationship between structure and value. Now, listen to this. This is very important. Because values support the structure. And the structure safeguards the values. Let me give you an example. Okay. Marriage between a husband and wife is a structure. What is a structure? The husband and wife is supposed to support one another till death do us part. We're supposed to live together until death do us part. That is a structure, correct? Why does so many marriages break up today? In some countries, it is more than 50%. The reason why marriage fails is while they have the structure, they don't have the values. What are the values that are very important in a marriage? The Bible says, husband, you're supposed to love your wife, correct? Husbands, you're supposed to love the wife. How much? Just like Christ loved the church and gave his life up for it. And what is the wife supposed to do? What is the value the wife must adopt? What is the practice? What is the attitude? Wife, you're supposed to submit to your husband in everything. In the book of Colossians, it says, wives, they are supposed to submit to your husband in the Lord. Okay, anything that is permissible in the Lord. And so you see, if the husband and the wife has these two values, husband truly loves the wife so much that they are willing to lay down their life for the wife, and the wives truly submit to the husband in everything. If they have these two values, do you think they can maintain the structure? Easy. The structure is most enjoyable. Like some of you have been married for a long time, and like for me, I really love being in a marriage relationship with my wife. The structure also safeguards the values. You see, because now you have the structure. If you are within the structure, you know what? Unless you develop those values, you cannot survive. So by hook or by crook, with the help of God, with Jesus as our example and the Holy Spirit as our guide, we need to develop those values. So it is a win-win. Values support the structure, and the structure safeguards the value. And so you think it is easy to practice the one team and one man? It is easy to say how it is supposed to operate. But it is able to operate only because the people who are inside already have the mature character. By mature character means we are willing to humble ourselves. We are willing to recognize the other person's gifts. Not only that, in every strength there is weakness. And so not only we recognize their gifts, we also need to learn to accept their weakness. People of apostolic tends to be more dominant. People who are teaching tends to be very straitjacket. Everything must be done like on the dot. People who are pastors tends to be more chatty. Now, all of us have our own biases. And in every strength, there's weakness, especially when you're pressed for time. You don't want to chat too much. You want to quickly come to a decision. So sometimes their strength can also be their weakness. What we need to do is that you must have the mature character to accept them, accept their weaknesses. And then even though we don't see eye to eye, because we recognize their ministry, we recognize the gifts that God has given to them, we willingly submit to their decision. That's humility. And of course, in order to keep the group together, we must love one another. Even during those times, we disagree with each other. So, if you don't have the 3-to-1 values, you will not be able to practice this structure. Okay, listen carefully. If you don't have the values, you will not be able to establish the structure. Even if you establish a structure, it's only the form. You only can draw the line and say, okay, we are following this, but then it will not be able to function because the moment it is tested, you have to make a decision and you have opposing views. That's when the rubber meets the road. That's when you are going to have frustration. How come he don't listen to me? How come I don't listen to him? How come he don't understand me? Why must I listen to him? Why is his idea better than mine? And it's going to be disastrous. Okay? So if you want to adopt this structure, which is very good, because the structure will force you to develop those values. But if you go in without any, or you don't have without some form of base in terms of this development of 3-to-1 values, and you rush into it, it's going to be very difficult for you. And so if you're not ready, then this is what you can do. You can do a transition model. You can tell everybody, let's try this for 6 months and evaluate and see what is suitable. If okay, we'll continue. If not, we make adjustments as we go along. And because it is a transition, people are not so, maybe you don't have people who are already in the fivefold. You can pick the people with the gifting and put them inside and operate and see how. And tell them this is a temporary structure. This is an ad hoc structure. Let's try it. If we are suitable in that position, you'll be in that position permanently. Otherwise, we try. And that's what I did with my with the English service because I really targeted that I'll be retiring in a few years' time. And so I have to release my responsibilities to another generation of staff. And so I appoint them into different positions. And after appointing them to different positions, because I've worked with them for many years, so I understand them. And then I say, okay, we're going to do that. And then after 1 year or so, all of you can feedback whether you're comfortable, whether you're happy in this position. If not, we can change. Or other people can also affirm you. So you must have self-affirmation. You must have affirmation from one another, and you must have affirmation from the congregation to say that, okay, you're suitable. And then you'll be a more permanent structure. So always start with a transitory structure before you go into a permanent structure. And what is really good about this, or what is very helpful in terms of one of the value, is to really see one another as important. There's mutual dependence, mutual acceptance, mutual love for one another. Every gift is important. So it's better, much better to say, I need you, than to say, I don't need you. If you're working in a team and you start saying, I don't need you, you are in trouble, or the team is in trouble. This attitude, and the even worse attitude is, I want to get rid of you. Then you have a serious challenge. But generally, what we want to do, practice in this structure, is that everyone is important. We are interdependent, not only in the people that is part of the one team, but also the people that is like decision makers, but also in the executors. Everyone is important, even the people that are part of the one group. We must have humility, because only in humility we will consider others better than ourselves. We will not consider only our own interests, but we'll also consider the interests of others. And this aspect of working within this structure, forcing us to be humble so that we can listen to others, prepares and trains us for working in the kingdom. Because in the kingdom, everyone is equal. Then we need to honor, revere God, we fear God, we have faith. What it means is that we need to allow the Holy Spirit to move through the gifts He has put into our lives. What do I mean by this? You remember that when we talk about the one team, one man, we are talking about people with gifts. It was God who gifted apostle, prophet, evangelist, pastor, teacher. And so why do we give the person with the apostolic calling or apostolic ministry to have the final say in an apostolic matter? Basically, what we are saying is that we recognize the gifting that God has put into you, and we honor God in you. We honor the work of God in you. So indirectly, by acknowledging you, we're acknowledging God. Indirectly, by acknowledging your gifting, we're acknowledging the works of God in our midst, especially in this particular area. And so that is the reason why we are willing to listen to you, we're willing to submit to you. And in so doing, we're actually allowing the Holy Spirit to move in the church through the giftings, through the ministries that He has placed in the individual. So that is why in such a structure, it's not so much people-led, it is more God-led, because we recognize the works of God in the lives of the people. And as a result, because it is one team, it is stable. And we are constantly raising up more people from the executing aspect, because they need enough practice in order to understand the principle better. You see, if you hold on to my teaching, then you will know the truth. If you hold on to my teaching, then you really understand the essence of the teaching. It's only when they practice enough, then they can rise up into that one team. And as a result, we're constantly developing and raising people. And so this structure will be very stable. And because we work together as a team, we can all hide. Why is this hiding important? So that people will not give us the glory, but they give the glory to Jesus. The reason why one man stands up is because there's no other people working together with him. And so whenever they only see the one man. Everything is spoken from the mouth of the one man. Everything is done by the one man. All decisions are made by the one man. And so all the eyes only see the one man. But if you have many men working together as a team, they are not able to see because they do not know who is making a decision. Let me tell you a true story. About 20 years ago, we started doing mission work in Thailand and also in Cambodia. I think that particular year we had about 60 people, and then the following year we probably have more than that. And there was an American missionary that was helping us in working this out. And after spending about a week in missions, both in Thailand and also in Cambodia, and he traveled with us, and he made this comment. He said, your church has something very interesting. And this is just among the youth. This is not even among the adults. This is just among the teenagers. And he made this comment. He said, your church is very interesting. He said, I can, because he's a very experienced minister, very experienced missionary. He said that when I travel with you all, I can see that sometimes you all face problem. But then the problem gets solved. And even though the problem gets solved, I do not know who actually makes the decision and who actually makes the decision and how this decision is passed on to the others. And then it is done. It is solved. So what he's actually saying is that I do not know who is the leader, who is the boss, who makes the final say. He said, I don't know. Something happens, we can see people talking, then later on the problem is dealt with. Because this is what we practice. One team, one man. And that's why we are able to remain hidden and established. Okay, this is the end of this particular part. Thank you for listening. I know it is challenging for some of you. Some of you will be able to understand it a bit better because you are involved in church leadership. For some of you, this is just information. But this is just in a very simple form because to really put it into practice, it has to be tailored. It has to be adjusted to fit into your particular situation, depending on the kind of people or the quality of people that you currently have, and also maybe the size of the church and where they are at in terms of values. And so just take this, and if you say, okay, I do not know where to start, but at least you have this in mind. Just think, I don't have to decide everything alone because I'm not a singular leadership. I don't have to agree with everybody else in order to come to a decision. But what is important is I need to recognize the works of God in different people's life so that I can tap on different strengths in order to come to a decision. That would be a good way to start. The next part that we want to talk about is on leadership succession. Now, this is something that is very critical and very crucial for the church. It should not be something that you think of only when you are about to retire or when you're about to hand the ministry over. While you may be able to find the people to hand the ministry over, they may not be the most suitable people unless you have had time preparing them and training them. Leadership succession is something that you should think about the moment you start serving, the moment you embark on a certain ministry. Now, why is this so? If you look at this particular picture, where do we get the people for the one team? It comes from the bottom one team. But there's no bottom one team if there's no one man to train the one team and to raise the people from the one group into the one team. The reason why we have the one team is because we have identified the people or teach the people so that they can practice Christian responsibilities. And through the practice of Christian responsibilities, they have discovered and exercise their gifts and become proficient in their gifts. Then only you have the candidates for the one team. And so this takes time to develop, and you will not be able to suddenly find them. So where do the people come from? They don't appear out of nowhere. They don't appear out of the blue. What we need to do is to solve this problem of preparing a good number of people that we can choose from and develop them so that they can become the people in the top one team. Okay, so how do we solve this problem? We solve this problem by multiplying 繁殖, or we solve this problem by reproducing after ourselves. Say, God wants us to multiply. God blessed them and said to them, be fruitful and increase in number. Some version says, be fruitful and multiply. Are you aware that this is the first commandment in the whole Bible? Even in the natural, God wants us to multiply. If there was no this command, we would not have so many people in the world today. And spiritually, what is the Great Commission? The Great Commission says, therefore go and make disciples of all nations. This idea of making disciples is the idea of multiplying, of reproducing. Of course, we are not reproducing after our kind. I mean, Paul says, follow my example, even as I follow Christ. Ultimately, what we want them to be is that they become disciples of Christ. And this is the spiritual aspect. And Paul gives us some kind of a handle to work with by giving us the example when he instructed Timothy. He says, and the things you have heard me say in the presence of many witnesses, entrust to reliable men who will also be qualified to teach others. And so what you have here is you have 4 generations. Paul taught Timothy. Timothy is supposed to teach reliable or faithful men, and this reliable or faithful man is supposed to teach others. And so you can see how this is passed on from one generation to the next generation, from Paul to Timothy, from Timothy to reliable or to faithful men, and from reliable or faithful men, they are supposed to teach others. And so if a leader does not multiply, if a leader does not reproduce, then he will have no one to take over from him if something should happen to him and he has to quit or leave the ministry. Now, in terms of multiplying, what I want to say is that it is so important because the cooperation of more than one generation is needed to fulfill God's calling, especially if the project or God's commission or God's calling is a bigger or greater calling. If it's a small project, of course, you can do it yourself. But the bigger ones requires both the wisdom of the elderly and also the energy of the young. And so, brothers and sisters, be very careful to remove all the generation gap in your church. If the old look down on the young, there'll be no future. Because the older people are usually people in authority. Once I was in a church, speaking in a church, in a congregation, and then I saw this man who was in his 90s. And I said, so I addressed him as an elder. He said, no, I'm not an elder. I said, so what are you? He said, I am Xiao Di Xiong. I'm just an ordinary church member. I said, oh, so I said, but you've been in church for a long time. He said, yeah, there are people who have been in church for a longer time and they are elders. So I asked them, so how old is their elder? Their elders are 100 plus. Really, this is a true story. So if those people are holding power in church and they look down on the young people and the young people are not raised up, by the time they die or by the time they leave the ministry, there'll be no succession. There'll be no successors. And if there's no successors, what will happen to the church? The church will die. The church will collapse. If the young look down on the old, which is also a great possibility in our present day and time, when there's no connection or relationship between the young and the old, what will happen? There will be rebellion in the church. The young will insist that they are right and the old are wrong. And so either they fight against the old ones or they will leave. And eventually the church will be destroyed. And so, brothers and sisters, don't look down on this generation gap. The generation gap is placed there by Satan to destroy the church. And as leaders of the church, as members of the church, we must do everything we can, like what the Bible says, make every effort to keep the bond of peace, to keep the unity that we have. And so we must make sure there's no generation gap. Yes, we can have differences in thought, which is a good thing, because we belong to different times. We have different ways of doing things. It is also a good thing. Sometimes it doesn't work for a generation, it might work for the next generation. So we need to be open to discuss with one another. So let us do everything we can in order to break this generation gap. Let's learn to appreciate one another. When you eat the fish, you can either focus on the flesh or focus on the bones. Of course, all the fish have bones, or most of them have bones anyway. And by focusing on the bones, we'll not be able to get the flesh. People all come in a package. We can either appreciate their strength or we can just focus on their weaknesses. If you focus on their weaknesses, you will always be grumbling, you'll always be murmuring, you'll always be upset. But if you focus on their strength, then you'll be able to appreciate them and invite them to co-work with you. And so, as young people, we need to appreciate the wisdom of the elderly. And as the elderly people, we need to learn and appreciate the energy of the young. Knowing that, of course, they do not understand as much because they have not walked as many miles as you have, crossed as many bridges as you have. So when we combine the wisdom of the elderly and the energy of the young, we will become a very powerful team in the church. And so if you look at the Old Testament and also the New Testament, you see the combination of these two generations at work in every church. You have Moses and Joshua, and they had to work together to enter the promised land. You see very prominently how Moses descended to the mountain to pray with the support of Aaron and Hur, and they are all the older generation. And the younger generation, like Joshua and his peers, they were fighting the Amalekites on the ground. So you can see the coming together of these two generations in order to move the nation forward. Then you have David and Solomon in the building of the temple. David was the one who prepared the finance. I guess he got all the connections because these people actually grew up with him and were blessed because of him. He also the one who sought God and came up with all the plans for all the architectural plan, as well as the plan for the crafts, the utensils that are supposed to use. But it was Solomon who executed the plan. In order to save the Israelites from Haman, it was Mordecai who strategized, but it was Esther who went to see the king, putting her life at stake. And through the combination of these two generations, we thank God Israel was saved that day. Saving the world, Jesus and the disciples. Has it been done yet? No. But Jesus multiplied by having disciples. The disciples multiplied by having their disciples, and it's passed on even until today. And so sometimes it doesn't just take two generations, it takes more than one generation, it takes multiple generations. And the next generation is critical to the success of our missions. And so it's very important to make sure that they are future generations. And very often in discipling, in raising up successors, we always think in terms of two generations. I pass on to the next generation. I want to challenge you to think in terms of 3 generations. Why do I say that? You see, in 2 Timothy, it says that, and the things you have heard me say in the presence of many witnesses, entrust to reliable men who will also be qualified to teach others. Paul is telling Timothy, Timothy, you are already trained, okay? You now know all the things that I wanted to teach, and now you know. So Timothy becomes the starting point. And then what is Timothy supposed to do? Timothy is supposed to teach reliable men who is qualified to teach others. So we have three generations. Timothy, reliable men who are qualified to teach, and then to others. Now, brothers and sisters, while I was preparing this, I saw something that is very important. Who are the reliable men? These reliable men are people who can teach and train others. Among your disciples, among the people you are taking care of, are there those people who are qualified to teach others? If all the people that you are taking care of don't know how to teach, then you will end with the next generation. So you must select from those people that you are taking care of, the people that you're discipling, the people that you're multiplying your life into. Among those, there must be people who are able to teach others so that it can pass on. Now, why is this three generation important? Okay. Now, very often, because we're two generations, I teach the next generation. Now, if the next generation, they receive, they are able to live well, they are able, their life become very Christ-like. One generation to the next generation. But if they do not know how to pass on to the next generation, then all the teachings, all the lifestyle will die at the second generation. But if you have a tri-generational model, what is going to happen is that I will train them, okay? Timothy will train the reliable men. And then what the reliable men is supposed to do is that they're supposed to train another generation. So basically what I'm trying to say is this: I am helping them, and then not just to know Jesus, but I also want to help them to train another generation so that they not only know how to practice Christian life, they can have the ability and also to know how to pass on, to train others. So I'm a trainer. I'm not just a teacher, I'm also a trainer. I teach and then I train. And so this person is not just a teacher, not just he can teach, he can also train others so that others may be able to train others. So because I know how to train, the next generation also know how to train. They also know how to train the next generation. And they, starting from that, is also a three generation. It doesn't just teach them, we also train them to teach others. And so this gets passed on. Okay, so you see the difference. If you have two generations, it may die with the second generation if they do not know how to teach. But if you have three generations, you ensure that from among your second generation, people who can teach the next generation. And you can also ensure that they can teach the generation to teach another generation. So this thing can actually pass on. So always think in terms of three generations. Who are the people that who among the second generation that you're taking care of is actually teaching a third generation? Or you must encourage everyone in your second generation to involve a third generation or to take on a third generation. Okay. So how can we multiply? You probably heard about this over and over again. And so I'm going to go through this quite quickly and simply, and then I want to share with you some of my insight as I put this into practice. Your experience may be different from mine. It doesn't matter. You can always give me feedback. You can always disagree with me, and you can share so that we can all learn better, learn from one another. So the first thing is you need to tie. You need to lead. You see, you need to have the parent's heart. I was just praying about this, and the thought that came to my mind is that the next generation of adults begins in the body of their parents. It begins in the heart of the parents. It starts with you having that passion, with you having that desire, with you having that, with you wanting to do it. And so you lead. And so when you lead, when you take another person under your care, basically in the beginning, you decide and they follow. For example, in feeding children, let's say this task of eating, you lead by feeding them. Okay? They don't have a choice. Whatever you feed, they have to eat because they are your children, especially when they're babies. Then you accompany them. You let them learn to eat on their own. but you're there to watch to make sure that this is done. Otherwise, if they don't know how to eat, then they will die of hunger. Then finally, when you know that they can eat on their own, you release them. They can eat on their own. Driving is the same thing. You lead, you drive them around. They don't have a choice. And then if you want to train them, sometime after you teach them, you let them drive and you accompany them. Let them see you, let them watch you, and then teach them and let them try. And then when you feel that, that's what I did to my daughter. After she got her license, I actually took her around different places, just to safe places to let her drive and practice, drive and practice, drive and practice. And then finally, when she was able to, then I release her, then she can drive anywhere she wants. So the one who is leading is the one who makes the decision, and the follower observes, studies, and tries to follow. Remember that this stage is not permanent. The goal of leading is to release. Don't just stay at leading. Let those people who is quickly move on into the next phase. Because the purpose of leading is not to be in this permanent state, but to start off, make them feel comfortable with you so that they are willing to explore what you want to teach them by themselves, which is to practice. And the next thing is that to accompany. To accompany means I suggest, but you decide. And I accompany you. In accompanying, the leader suggests, but it is the follower that decides. And then the leader accompany them. This is probably the most difficult of the three phases. It is difficult because in all likelihood, the follower will make mistakes. If you do not allow them to make the wrong decisions, they will never learn. Sometimes the most heartbreaking thing for the parents is knowing that this decision that the children make will cause them to end up in trouble, but they refuse to listen. They still want to do it their way. So what do you do? And because they refuse to listen, it doesn't matter what you say, they will try anyway. And true enough, something goes wrong and there are consequences. So what it means to accompany is, I suggest, but you have the final say, you decide. And when there are consequences, what are we supposed to do as parents? We are supposed to help them bear the responsibilities if we can, and as much as possible. You see, this is a process that we cannot escape. Because falling or failing is a necessary part of the growing process. If you don't allow them to fail, they will never progress. And so in leadership, when you are trying to raise successes, you need to put them in positions where they can try and fail. You need to let them make their own decisions so that they will learn what is right and what is wrong, so that they can become more careful in the future. Sometimes they can learn from what you say, but there are times when they can only learn from their decision. You see, parents, it is really not easy to raise up the next generation. Those of you who are parents, how old are your children today? And how much did you invest in each of your children when they were growing up? Just don't talk about time, because it's very difficult to count how much time you invested in them. Just count how much money you have invested in them. By the time they enter university, we probably have spent something like 500,000 or 1 million ringgit just to raise one child. Think about all the food they eat. Think about all the pocket money they've given. Think about the school fees you have paid. Think about all the trips that they have taken. If raising a physical child is so challenging, raising a spiritual child is also not easy. But it is exciting. You see, when just talk about my children, because I know that one day my children will leave me. So I set myself a terminus. By the time they're 18 years old, they will no longer be with me. Because by the time that they're 18, it is likely that they will move on to a tertiary institution, which is not based in Johor Bahru. And when they're away from me, my biggest desire and goal for them is that they will continue to love God, they will continue to serve God, they will continue to make decisions in a godly way. But how can they make decisions in a godly way and therefore live a godly life if they do not know how to make it? And if I, as a parent, all I do is lead, I decide you follow, then when will they learn how to make decisions for themselves? And so when I realized this, I decided that by the time my children are young, when they are young, as soon as they can, as soon as they start thinking, as soon as they have like and dislike, I want to engage them, to speak to them, and to talk with them, and to help them identify the principles, the values behind their decision-making process, so that they understand why they decide in a certain way, why they think in a certain way. And so especially when they become teenagers after the age of 11, most of them has matured to a certain point where they can carry a healthy discussion with me. Some of you from single language background, your children may be able to discuss with you even at a younger age. And so what I did was that I very often have discussion with them when I see that they're happy or unhappy, they're sad or they're angry, and then we'll try to explore what are the thoughts, what are the values that causes them to do that. And whenever they have to make a major decision, we'll discuss it, but I will always let them have the final say. I will evaluate with them. I will tell them as a daddy, on the basis of my experience, if you make this decision, you will end up here. These will be the consequences. I don't think you should do it, but I won't stop you from doing it. If you want, you can try. And sometimes they take my advice, sometimes they don't. They insist on trying, and so let them try. And when they make mistakes, what I do is that I come around them, I say, yeah, this is what I expected to happen, and it happened accordingly, but never mind, let's see how we can deal with this. And so I provide him or her the support that is necessary for them to overcome that setback in their lives. And so as I continue to do that, they understand more and more of God's principle, so much so that when they leave my care, when they are no longer with me, they are able to stand on their own 2 feet. They know how to think. They know what values apply when they make decisions. And so, brothers and sisters, this accompanying must be done sincerely and wholeheartedly for the most effective impartation. It needs to be done in love, because anything that is not done in love is not worth doing. You see, one of the big problems we have in the church today is we have leadership succession, but we missed out on this middle part, accompanying. And so what we have is lead and then release. I lead, and then when I'm supposed to go, I just look for someone to quickly pass over. That actually is not called release. That is actually dumping. I'm running, I got this thing, I've been holding this for so many years. Now I've got to leave, I got no more time. I just throw this ball to you. I don't care whether you're able to catch it. I don't care whether you will swim or you will sink, but you take over. And so in this case, many of those people who take over from us will fail. And that is why it is very important for us to go through this accompany phase. Accompany them, help them to learn, whether it is skills or tasks, whether it is value system, or whether it's the truth of God. We have to accompany them. Take time to do it. And accompanying has to be flexible, because different people have different style. They also have different style of learning. Different people require different methods or strategies to groom them. Lazy people need to be nudged, they need to be pushed, otherwise they may not move. But there are those who are very positive and there are those who self-motivate. That one, you need to give them more room because pushing them may be counterproductive. So the first thing we need to do is to lead. The second thing we need to do is to accompany them. And this is the challenging part. Decision is not yours, but responsibility is yours. And of course, the third part is to release, where they mature enough, so much so that now they can decide. Okay, and others will follow them. Okay, and so that is the time, and that's the purpose, is to release them so that they can multiply. In this third step, the follower has shown maturity. The leader then releases the follower so that the leader can become a leader to others. I think what I've written here is you decide, others follow. Maybe this is wrong. It's so much. Okay. You decide. That means that your follower decide, and then after that, others will follow them. Okay. So there are several useful guidelines to consider when releasing. But we'll look at those guidelines in a short while. So how does this lead, accompany, release happen? First of all, is God do, I do. We read, we learn, we understand from the word of God. Or we may learn by watching the lives of others. Paul says that what you have seen in me, you also practice. What you have heard, what you have seen in me, you also do. Follow my example is even as I follow the example of Christ. And so what we see that is good in others, we also do. And then when we know how to do what we need to do, what we need to carry on is we do, and we invite someone to learn from us. That is the leading part. Okay. Then after that, we break the accompanying part into two. So we become the person who is the master, you know. So I do, and then you watch me, and then you follow. You just try to imitate, and you learn from imitation. Learn. And the next part is you do, I watch. And so now you do, I watch, I give comments, I help you to understand the final parts of the process or the final parts of this teaching. So you do, I watch. It's very interesting because when we watch how other people do, it's always very easy. Then when we have to do it ourselves, it can be very challenging because we may miss out certain important steps or certain important nuances of the step we make. Yeah. Then after that, there is that release, and your next generation goes on to lead others. Now you do, another person watch. He watches the third person. Then you go on, you do, he does. You do it together with you. That's the first stage of accompanying. And then the second stage of accompanying, he do or he does, and you watch over him so that you can guide him to do better. So finally, he does and others watch. This is going into the fourth generation. So you are the first generation, and then the next person is the second. You take on a second generation, the second generation take on the third generation, and the third generation take on the fourth generation. Now there's two parts of the accompanying phase. The first part of the accompanying phase is he learns what you're doing. That's it. You do, I do. I do, you do. He learns what you're doing. Then you go into the second part of the accompanying, where he doesn't just do, he gets you as like a tutor. And when you do, you watch him, you give him advice so that he doesn't just do, he can do well. So in accompanying, we don't want them to just do, we want them to do well. And so when they do well, then we're able to release it to them. Okay. So I find that in releasing, there are several key points we need to learn and practice. Number one, release must be appropriate. We must do it appropriately. What do I mean by appropriately? It depends on the ability and the maturity of the person. The speed of the release is also on whether the person can assume the responsibility well. So sometimes releasing can be a process, not necessarily a point, especially if they're holding on a simple task. Let's say, for example, you are teaching them you're teaching them how to preach, and so they learn how to preach. Then you can release them. But let's say they what you're releasing them to is more of it's a big project. It's a very important project, like what we are currently going through, because I'm stepping down, or I plan to step down, and then my peers, like with me, we are all planning to step down, and so we have to prepare the next generation. If we suddenly step down, of course, we've been preparing them for a while, we are accompanying them, and if we step down and hand everything over to them, chances are they will collapse, because it is suddenly an upgrade from what they used to do to what they are not used to do. So what we do now is that we have phased out release. And so let's say this task, one of the things that we are in charge of is the remuneration program. How we award salary to our staff at the end of the year. How do we evaluate them? So what we do is that we break up the task into 3 different phases. So instead of handing the whole thing to them at one go, we're handing over to them in separate phases. They go through, okay, this year they're involved in phase 1, next year they're involved in phase 1 and phase 2, and then the next year they're involved in phase 2, 1, 2, and 3. And then they take over. Then as they take over, that's the accompanying part. Then we release to them, and after we release to them, we become their consultant. So when you think about process, especially release, especially for bigger projects, it doesn't have to be a point, it can be a process. Thirdly, release is not termination. It is not, now you go your way, I go my way, I've got nothing to do with you. Release is a freedom. You release your mentee, so that, or your person that is your disciplee, or your disciple, or you release your children to have greater freedom to decide and to do what they feel is important and appropriate to do. But there can always be consultation. You're not quitting from the person's life. It is like your son has now taken over the family. He has his own family. He released, he established his family. But the grandfather or his father is always available for consultation. So that's how I see release. One of the challenges that I find in emphasizing 代培放 or in emphasizing multiply, in order to do it well, we need to have these 4 qualities. Number 1, we need to love them like our children. And so we always talk about spiritual parent and spiritual children. And what I notice sometimes is the unhealthy part of spiritual parenting. We emphasize so much on parenting that our children always becomes only our children. That means they're always younger than us. They're always not as mature than us. They're always under us because we are their parents and they are our children. But what we are doing is that we are raising up people for God. And so what we need to do is that we need to love them like children, but we need to learn to speak to them like a friend. We are not parents that instruct them, that demands of them. But what we want to do is speak them like a friend, through influence, through relationship. And then even though they are our children, we want to give them respect, like they are on the same level as us, like they are our peers. And then finally, very important, even though we are the one that is doing the leading, that is doing the accompanying, that is doing the release, we also want to learn from them. Because God works through amazing ways. God can bless us and speak to us through our spiritual children. And so I feel that by putting these 4 aspects of 代培放, lead, accompany, release into our practice, we will have a better and healthier relationship with the people under our care. We want to love them wholeheartedly like our children, but not possess them. We want to love them wholeheartedly like our children, but we also want to respect them like they are at our same level. Speak to them with gentleness, with care, like a friend, and also respect them and learn from them like our master. Why is release so important? Maybe because I'm at this stage, so I have a bit more thoughts on this perspective. Release is critical to the well-being and growth of the church. If you have no release, then everything will be stuck, jammed, clogged, and there will be a lot of frustration. Without release, the positions at the top will always be occupied by the same person. Okay? Because the top is fixed, there cannot be any upward movement. And so if there are 3 levels of leadership, 1 man, 1 team, 1 group. Okay, so if the 1 man don't change, if there's no release, then the people who are at the bottom, the 1 group has no way of going, 1 team has no way of going up. Then the people who are at the bottom have no way of going up. So everything gets stuck. And if they don't go up to another level, then they cannot experience more. They cannot understand more of the truth of God. They cannot understand more of the practices in the church. And suddenly, one day when you leave, they are not able to go on to the next level because they have not had the experience. So if you don't vacate your place at the top, there's no space for people to move into and grow. Only when you leave, when you release, then people can step into your position and learn what you learned before and become more mature and better. Secondly, release is critical for succession. Why? The bigger the church, you need the longer runway. The bigger the church, the greater challenge of church leadership. Leaders need to be more experienced and better trained. So what we need to do, because of the longer runway, we need to have an earlier lead, accompany, and release. And the earlier we release, the more time they can learn to become proficient in the top leadership position. Because you can still be there to guide them and help them. So we need to, the bigger the church, the sooner we need to hand over top leadership position to younger people. Release from church to enter the kingdom. Having a released mentality prepares one to hand over and allows one to step out of ministry in the church and enter into ministry in the kingdom. Yeah. So with this perspective in mind, that is the reason why one of our church leaders is able to lay down his ministry in the church and then move out almost entirely to ministry in the kingdom. Okay. Release grooms selflessness. You want to be selfless? One of the very good way is to always have release in your mind, because then you're not hanging on. You know, we can hold on to a person like that, or we can hold on to a person like that. That means when they are ready, they can go. When you hold on to a person like that, we're saying, it is mine. When you hold on to a person like that, we're saying that it is not mine. I'm just temporarily holding him. And so when we are prepared to release, when our hands, our palms are open, that person can go away anytime when he's ready. Why does release help to breed or groom selflessness? It is 我有,我不要. I have, but I don't want. If you don't have, don't talk about don't want. You don't have, you can't lay down. It is only when you have, then you can lay down. When you don't have, you talk about lay down, it is meaningless because there's nothing to lay down. But when you have, you lay down, you really say, I can be selfless. I have authority, I lay down my authority. I have position, I lay down my position. I have privilege, I lay down my privilege. So release helps us to begin with the end in mind, and the end is to let go. The end is to have nothing. No position, no control, no glory. And with this nothing in mind, the path towards the end has already been set. The more you walk towards that path, the more you'll become selfless. Okay. And it's an exciting thing, because when you're more selfless, you have more of Jesus. And to have more of Jesus is the best thing that can happen in our life. And it allows for invisibility. A lot of times we talk about being hidden, being hidden, being hidden. If you're right at the front, how can you be hidden? But by releasing, by pushing another generation up into the front, and you step into the background, naturally, you become hidden. You become invisible. But even though we are invisible, we can still have great influence. Not that we want that influence, we just want to influence them, if anything, for them to become more dedicated to God, to become more faithful to God. Not to us, but for them and God. And you can become very effective influencing, even though you're invisible, if you are really selfless. Because you're doing it not for your own sake, but for His sake. And you can really influence, even though if you are invisible, provided you are proficient in your ministry. Because the wiser, the better and the wiser we are, the more we can offer to them. And then number 3, we need to maintain good relationship with them. If we are able to maintain good relationship with the people we disciple or with our spiritual children, they're aware that everything we do is done out of love for them. There'll always be that relationship. And it's in the end, it's not so much work, it's not so much ministry. It is that you just enjoy one another's presence. And when you talk, you naturally talk about things that is related to God and His kingdom. And it's just an exchange of fellowship where you help one another and grow better together. Okay. So after you release, what do? I know Kim Tai has 7 hands. I've got only 6 hands because one of his hands is released. Okay. This is the 6 hands after release. Okay. I think it should be Xia Fang. I think I didn't change one of the Chinese character. Never mind. The first hand is to clap hands. And this is for encouragement. You release, they're doing the job now. You clap hands. You encourage them. You say things like, I believe God has called you for such a time as this. You are a mighty warrior. Well done. And then the other one, shake hands. It's like affirmation. You have done an excellent job. You have preached really well. I really admire this part about what you're doing. That is fantastic. And then, of course, you can reward them. Take them out for a meal. And usually you're older, you're younger generation, there are children that are growing up, children that may be going into tertiary education. And since you're older, assuming that maybe you have some financial resources, you can also help them to pay for their children's education. Support them. Then number 4, helping hands. Helping hands is to support them. How do you support them? By doing the tedious and time-consuming task to free up their time so that they can focus on the more important task. Let's say, for example, one of the things that I plan to do after I hand over is still be part of the church ministry, but I want the younger people or the younger generation of leaders to be more involved in making decisions that are important to the church for the development of the ministry. And so what I do is that I can take on the more tedious tasks, like sometimes marriage counseling. You have couples that are not seeing eye to eye. And to take on one case means the commitment for several months, or even for the more difficult cases, it may run into several years. But by doing that, it frees them for their time to handle other issues. So just like Grandfathers sometimes have to take care of grandkids so that the parents can go and do the work. And then number 5 is raise hands. Raise hands is to glorify God. When you see your spiritual children enjoying success, when you see your disciple become mature and influential, do not say, I've raised this person. It is not you, but the grace of God that works in them. They have matured because of their humility and obedience. You have had the privilege of accompanying them. Okay, number 6, invisible hands. That's where you become hidden. The leaders have matured, and now you can remain behind the scene, but you can continue to observe what they do. And when it's really necessary, the invisible hands may emerge and then offer a word of advice. That relationship is ongoing. So brothers and sisters, I want to encourage you to really develop a heart for developing the next generation. Don't wait until you're old. Don't wait until you're about to retire. Start now. As long as you are in the ministry, think about how we can raise another generation, another level of people to take over from you, so that there will always be people involved in being involved in ministry, being a channel of blessing, so that the work of God can be done. And you can do this by leading, by accompanying, by releasing. You have a lot of pain and frustration during the accompanying phase, but that is the phase that we must all dig our foot in. Don't give up, hang on to Jesus and work it through. That is the most exciting part, because that's the part where you face the most challenges. So my sharing finishes here. Thank you very much for your time. Thank you for giving me an opportunity to share. In future, if you want to have a dialogue about this, just feel free to connect with me and then we can talk further. God bless you.